Ben, thanks very much for joining us for a Q&A. I was going to open. Did you ever meet the Queen, by the way? Did that happen? No, you didn't.
No,
nor me. I was going to say you're the first person I've met whose face appears on a banknote, okay. But it's not strictly true. There's a commemorative £5 note in the UK that has Jack Nicklaus, the golfer, on it, and it was the 50th anniversary of his first Open Championship. I think it was a Golden Bear special edition, and I met Nicklaus when I was 9 years old at Royal Troon at the Open Championship, and he inspired me to take up golf. So if that's a portent of things to come for you, maybe you'll be an inspiration as well to people who see you on a banknote. It's 4 years since I've been here. We did this in Basel with Alistair. I had hair back then, which is a slightly sobering reflection. With Alistair, I took him back to the start, and I wanted to do the same with you. You had a delightful picture of you as a little under-9s ginger kid, which is roughly where my daughter is at the moment in her sporting journey. What kind of child were you? Were you a sporting child? Did you come from a sporting family?
Yeah, I grew up in Brentford, the team now that weirdly I'm performance director for in the Premier League. We were terrible. I was a Brentford fan all my life. We were rubbish when I was a kid. I grew up by the old stadium. Probably could have got in the team when I was 9, actually. They were rubbish then. Grew up in West London, went to a state school, junior school there. My dad had made it as he'd been an international javelin thrower on a few occasions. Was a keen rugby player. My mum played cricket for Gloucestershire as a wicket keeper, and my granddad was a cricketer for Glamorgan when they were amateur. He was a minor, but mum's from Wales. I played. I was a junior athlete as well, 400 metre hurdles. Was at Thames Valley Harriers. My captain was Linford Christie back then. Wow. And then I played rugby from 7. My dad and my mum took me to the minis, and I played rugby through there, and then loved that. So I was one of those kids that played everything, really.
And was there a coach in your childhood years that particularly inspired you?
There's a couple of things that happened in my childhood. Yeah, my first PE teacher was a Welsh PE teacher that was very, very just positive about everyone and everything. And gave me that joy of playing sport, really, as a kid. And 40 plus years later, I still see him. And he lives nearby me, walks his dog in the park. We catch up regularly and chat. And he had a massive effect on me, like just to remind me of that positivity that you have to show in your coaching and in your day-to-day. And he's still got it as in his late 70s. So from that side, and then probably the biggest kind of driver for me as a kid growing up was my best mate, a kid called Noel, and Noel had come across from Zambia as a young child, and we were best mates. Did everything together, played in the same rugby team, football teams. And then as we got older in teenage years, he started to get into the wrong crowd. To the point where he went to prison for armed robbery and then left, and then basically spent his whole life kind of in that criminal underworld, in the gang world. And as a kid, as a young ginger teenager, I was there the day that unfortunately he went and did that first crime. I always felt guilty that I didn't help him become his best version and could somehow have influenced him. And it drove a lot of my coaching and my teaching, that I wanted to help people be their best versions and know that whilst you can do all the positive stuff, it's also trying to help people not make those bad decisions. Some of them could be really small, but we all know that critical path as an athlete, they don't all get there. And so the opportunity to try with everybody, to try to give them their best chance to just fulfill their potential remains like central really to my coaching and my performance philosophies.
You sound very humble when you talk about your own playing career as a professional rugby player. I wonder, was there always a sense in you that you could be this good as a player, but actually there was a bigger calling for you? Was there a moment that you realized that you were good at it?
Probably. I was a very good junior, and and was probably top of my game there, and probably took it for granted a little bit, the talent. And so I didn't do the nuts and bolts that I should have done, which down the line meant when I played, I think made my first team senior professional debut would have been back then as a late teenager. I didn't have all the bits in place really to sustain that, and I broke down quite a lot. And when big blokes, rugby players, got hold of me, I was in a lot of trouble, 7 operations and stuff like that. But I think I use that as reminds me that, to reinforce to our younger players that I work with now, do your foundation work, because it will bite you if you don't.
I heard you say in a podcast, I don't know if it was your podcast or whether you were appearing on somebody else's in that way, that people who podcast cross-pollinate each other's podcasts very successfully. Yeah. But you said you don't do regrets, but if you could go back and speak to an 18-year-old Ben Ryan, you would say do more press-ups.
Do more press-ups, yeah.
Which is a metaphor, obviously, but could be taken quite literally too.
Yeah, it could. Yeah, it was a big thing for me and I see it in some of the young talent that we have at Brentford. That they are very talented, and it's got them to the point where they get very good deals, and they're driving very nice cars, and they're buying their parents very nice houses. But they still haven't done their basics, like on and off field, to get that consistent behaviours so they can stay there and keep doing what they're doing.
We'll come on to talk about your MOT in a second. Before you went to Fiji, and obviously now at Brentford, you had positive and negative experiences professionally. Did you ever look around you at some of your previous employers, and I don't mean the murderous dictators, but and think, when I do this, when I'm in this position, that's what I don't want to be. Do you derive as much from the negative influences you've had going through your journey as you do the positive ones?
Yeah, it's a great question, because often when you get those questions, like who's the good stuff, the good coaches, and like we've all had good coaches, but we've probably all had a load of rubbish coaches. And it's like, right, find what made them rubbish? What don't you want to do as a coach, and what really triggered you? Because especially around creating positive cultures, I remember a coach that I absolutely adored, and he would always have my back. And then we had an analysis session, and he made fun of me basically in that session to get a bit of a cheap laugh, and derided me. And I completely lost that relationship. Just went like that, and they never got back. And it takes seconds. You could destroy an athlete in seconds by not being consistent. And those sort of things you remind yourself all the time, like be consistent, take a breath. If you're going to say something that you might be construed as negative of your athlete, doesn't mean you shouldn't give negative and be honest with your athletes, but just think about your ABCs, your approach, behaviors, and conversations, because you can lose an athlete so quickly, and you know how long it takes to build trust with the people that you're working with. So just treasure that as much as possible, and that's the biggest key I learned with some of the coaches that perhaps were not doing that when I was growing up.
I think that's great advice. We'll have the opportunity for members of the audience to ask questions at the end, so start thinking about the questions that you'd like to ask, and I'll try and leave 10 minutes maybe at the end to do that. Let's go into your philosophy of conducting an MOT when you go into an organization, be it a national governing body or national association or a team, a club like Brentford. We got a flavour, I think, from you going into Fiji that there wasn't really a car there to MOT when you moved in. Yeah. Very different experience going into a club like Brentford that already has a relatively high level of performance. How does that change the pace at which you conduct that MOT, and what cues and markers are you looking for that determine how quickly or slowly you would want to implement change at an organisation like that?
So that first stage doesn't change as far as if it's Brentford, New York Knicks, France Rugby, whoever it is. You have that moment where you're gathering information. You're listening, you're finding out as much about the culture. I talked about it, that it's not just about going into a new team, but it's that point for that new team. So for Brentford, for example, I came in after they'd just had their first season in the Premier League, upset the odds on staying in the league. Everybody was very upbeat. They were in very basic training facilities that were about to get changed, and they were still doing what they're doing. So you can't come in to it like that and hope that you're going to gain trust of senior coaches and managers like Thomas if you're, after 5 seconds, you're starting to tell them, well, this is best practice here and here. You should be doing that, doing that. Why aren't they doing that? What's happening here with the GPS? Why the nutrition like that? Why do you have your day off on Wednesday, not on a Thursday? You have to see what's going on, and then start to see what's below the line and what's above the line. And so you go through the system and the departments and the areas of the organization. What's below the line, i.e. what's not good enough? And as a coach or performance director now, for me, do you have to then take more hands-on approach and be more directive to get above the line, to get to a minimum standard? And if you're going to do that, then you need to tell people why you're getting more involved. And then what's above the line that's flourishing already that you think, okay, you can add to. And so I like to use the analogy again as anything I do is a garden. So when at Brentford, I've got a garden, Brentford Garden. Thomas is a lovely bush at the moment. Don't have to do anything with that bush. It's great, it's robust, it's flourishing. There's other stuff that I'm looking at going, right, I need to keep putting water on that, or that might need a little bit of a trim. And that's culture. You're always having to look at your garden and see, and never take anything for granted that it's okay, leave it alone. Keep a constant eye on it.
Two things in that environment, obviously. The first is dealing with individual players, some of whom will probably feel they're already competing at a level. Does that change your approach in building the trust to get them to, I suppose, allow you to improve them, or for them to open up to the prospect of further improvement and lifting their level?
Yeah. Sometimes there's some obvious, like the 2 times, I'm sure a lot of coaches will know this, the 2 times that you start to have those gaps to influence athletes is when they're injured or when they're playing really badly, or in my world, dropped. So if they're dropped or injured, that's when probably their ear's going to be a bit more open. And you obviously don't want to just wait for those moments, but you know that is a little bit more of an open door for you. And then the other stuff is all about persuasion and influence and negotiation, finding the right pin code for each of your players, knowing that you might just leave a little seed of something with someone around. I don't know, you're at the coffee machines and doing a coffee, and we're talking about hydration, and you might say something about, I don't know, that this athlete has, do you know that if your hydration drops by 5%, your risk goes up by 20% of a soft tissue posterior injury? Well, you might say something like that and go, because that's what happened last week with Bundia at Aston Villa. And then you walk off, and then you come back and go, have you seen that this is available now for the hydrate? What's your routine for water? And they go, I haven't really thought about it. And it's like, oh, well, why don't you just do a test with a nutritionist, see where you are now, and then we can put something, okay, maybe I'll do that. And it's like, yeah, maybe not, see how you feel. And then they come back, and then you see other players doing it. And it's you can't force it, particularly if players are at already a high level, they're internationals, they're playing the Premier League. You can't really, until you do have that trust. And if you've already done a couple of little interventions, or they've done a little interventions that you might have nudged them for, then you can be a little bit more robust and say, whoever it is, Ivan, well, how about this time? You should be doing this. You're not doing this. That's not the right behaviours on a match day -1, whatever it is.
You can firm it up as you develop that relationship.
Yeah.
The flip side of that, of course, is if you have a weed in your garden, an aggressive weed in your garden that potentially is threatening the culture around them, how easy or difficult is it to maintain the culture that you're trying to build of trust at the same time as pruning that weed or ripping it out at the roots? How do you approach those challenging conversations? And
my views change now. Firstly, have that challenging conversation. Don't let anything get just go, I'll have a look at it in a couple of weeks to see what it's like. If somebody's done something that's against your values or below the line or against what the code of conduct is between athlete, coach, organisation, pick it up immediately. Now, I used to think that if, I'm new talents coming into the building, either players or staff, that as you're constantly bringing in better people, that standard will rise and that will weed out the lesser able staff. That was my original thought process around it. What I found out is that actually you're doing that and you're bringing better and better people in, that those people that are not so good actually still have a very strong voice and can drag you down. Mm-hmm. So rather than think, oh, well, they'll rise up standard, how I work it now is when the higher standards come in and they unexpose those and they actually become an issue, I change them. So rather than that change, I go straight to the second bit.
Yeah.
And that's taken me 20 years plus to reverse on trying to do it the first way, realizing it's the second way.
Yeah, interesting. Can I, a show of hands quickly if anybody does have any questions, just waiting at the moment, just so that I know where I'm coming to later. Anyone? One there, right? Okay, there's one at the front, just so that the runners with the microphones can be ready for you. It's okay, not just yet, but just hold on so that we know where everybody is. On that subject of athletes, the challenges you have with athletes, their insecurities, from where do you find most athlete insecurities stem? And how deep do you go with them in terms of the sports psychology to try and get to the root of issues that they're struggling with?
I look at it from both ends. So most coaches' meetings, you hear the relatively same things around the athletes. They're not consistent enough. It's too much up and down in their play, either in training or in games, or they can't get rid of a negative action on the pitch quick enough. And then with the players, often it's around their routines and how they sometimes try to chase the games. So how do I explain this? Often in a team sport, and it'd be interesting to hear how you feel about this for individuals, they need a group of games, of matches to allow themselves to feel that momentum and they're in the game. And often to solve the problem for a player that's not being consistent is just allow them to play 6 games. Now, unfortunately, you can't do that very often in the Premier League, where you just go, right, let's just give them 6 games. Because if you lose those 6 games, potentially, people lose jobs. So that doesn't solve it. So then you have to then help them try to create some internal mechanisms to allow themselves to be a bit more consistent. Because if, say, that guy's on the bench and he's coming on for 20 minutes, he wants to absolutely blow the house off, the roof off the house, and show to the manager, you've got to look, and then they start chasing games, and then they start creating red flags. So they'll say they make a mistake, it's a red flag, maybe make another mistake, rather than think, just stop this. And when the guys talk about momentum, it'd be fascinating to hear around all of this, because you get red flags. Now, we get this in everything, like you miss a drop shot, or you hit the net, or whatever it is, where there's a couple of red flags. Rather than try to then chase it with a massive green flag where you do something out of this world, which a lot of players will do, they should just try to get that momentum back by doing something simple. Whether that's a simple pass, maybe a simple word to a defender to get in the right position, but something to just reverse that trend. That's quite hard for players because they don't want to do that. They want to break the bank to show that they're at that certain level. So that kind of emotional control is probably, again, on that Pareto's principle, is probably most of this around emotional control is where you get the most conversations and where players want to learn the most about trying to improve that.
One way, of course, that coaches can try to impact on that build-up of red flags is during team talks. There's a lot of footage of you on YouTube giving halftime talks. I'm quite interested, and I will be interested to hear what the guys in the next session say about this, and it dovetails quite nicely into their chat about momentum. But I'm often intrigued by the value of a halftime. To me, halftime in football is really more about the crowd being able to get a pie and a bovril, to use a very 1950s British analogy. And of course, from a broadcast point of view, it's about commercial opportunities as well. So we kind of understand why it is as long as it is. Is there a value that coaches can impart in those breaks? In badminton, we have potentially 5 in every match at 11 points at the end of the game. You know, what can you do in those moments that can regain momentum for a player? And is it harder to speak to athletes about it? Is it harder to convince athletes just to stay where they are than it is to try and hit a trampoline and get them up from a negative position?
Yeah, so when you get those moments of space between actions, so wherever that is in court or half times or wherever, then you've got, again, you're coming at it from two different sides. You've got the coaches and what they've seen, and then you've got the athlete and what they've seen. Now, if really either don't get any sort of input into it, then you're probably not optimizing that space in between. But the worst thing you can do is as a coach is just tell them what they're thinking and what they're feeling and what they should be doing, because you're not the one playing the shots, scoring the goals, defending the striker. So you have to bring them into that. So that first question often in that space is, you know, what are you seeing, how are you feeling? To open that up, to feel safe that they can say, I keep getting pushed to this side of the court and I can't manage to avoid that, and whatever it is, or I'm not getting the timing off this, or the shape's not, I'm seeing that they're out of shape here, if we can get the ball into here. If you don't have that information, then as a coach, you can look at things from a one dimension and you won't be able to see the multi-dimensional opportunity and it's that thinking. I don't know if you've read a book, there's a really good book called Upstream. As coaches, we should all be looking upstream. So rather than somebody just misses an open goal or misses a penalty or something really obvious and you criticize technique in that moment, you should really be going upstream to think about how did that happen rather than in the moment. And so the upstream story is around, we're both walking down the river and we see a kid drowning in the river, and you dive in to save that kid. And you pull them out, and then you see another kid coming down the river, and you dive in again. And as you're doing that, and you're seeing that, and there's a third one further up there, I'm just walking down the river. And you're like, Ben, what are you doing? There's another kid in there, you need to help me out. And it's like, well, I'm going to try and find out who's throwing them in. And that's, as a coach, you've got to have that thought, put away. Don't you think about that action, go, where's that come from? And in football, it's the third action's always very important. It's like, if you create that shape, that will force that action, then what's our third action? Yep. And it's the same in lots of sports, like try to get yourself upstream and don't go into that moment. And that can be part of your conversations in those spaces between actions.
Really good example of positive influences that you can implement. What about negative influences that are coming externally? We live in a very interconnected world now. Social media can be an extraordinary force for good, in some people's opinion, but it could also quite negatively impact players' responses to a bad performance or even their preparation for a major match. How do you control, if it's possible to control, those external influences that are coming in to your culture and disrupting it?
I have an example. Before I joined Brentford, I was mentoring one of the players that's gone on to play for another Premier League team. And if he had a bad performance, he would go into the change room after the game, go straight onto social media, and everybody would go, missed another open goal, can't score for, rubbish. He would then leave early, not talk to anyone. He'd come in late on the Monday for training, again, head down, negative, get out as soon as he could, being embarrassed about that, and then he would be thinking, well, my next opportunity is that following Saturday to try to make everything right. And he's wasted a whole week on trying to have a look at it, see if he could be more positive about it. And then if that moment's good, and the opposite happens, score a goal, look at that, oh, everyone thinks I'm brilliant, he'll be bouncing in, he'll be just like this, emotional, all over the place. And so there's an obvious solution there, is that he doesn't look at his social media. But actually, it wasn't that easy for him, and we had to think of different ways for him to do that, and also to reframe things, and for him to understand, like, your brain, if there's 10 people saying that you're absolutely amazing, and there's one person that says you're an idiot, you've left that thinking, I'm an idiot. And your brain works like that, and it picks up on those sort of things. And so even some education around, if you're going to get on your social media, be aware that this is what will happen if you've not you've not performed, and try to get some more consistent behaviours. And with our senior staff, like take Thomas Frank, who is an exceptional head coach, he's not on social media. So immediately he's gone, well, I don't need it. It's not going to help me be a better coach, so it's gone. And so he's got way more space to not have any of that noise coming.
Beyond your own commercial activities and appearances, how active do you keep yourself on social media, but from the point of view of your role at Brentford?
Yeah, I used to be on it a reasonable amount because I was bouncing around different teams, and as a consultant, there's some visibility. I joined Brentford and decided I wouldn't put a single social media post out for 12 months, and it was really cathartic. It was great.
Didn't miss it.
Didn't miss it at all. People thought I'd disappeared and was unemployed. A lot of them that didn't follow football. But it was really good. Yeah, it was really good. And now I'm back on it, and it's like I've maybe put 3 posts in a year. So there's not a lot of benefit, if I'm honest with you. I understand about athletes building brands. I get that. A lot of our top players have someone already doing that, so they can manage all their posts and make sure they don't see any of that, and that's another way to do it. But not everybody's got cash to be able to just chuck at the problem. But you've also always got to just weigh this up and like guiding principles. Will that make me a better performance director by being on social media? No, it won't. So therefore, it's not a conversation. And it's always really important to have those thoughts and then ask the athlete that, is it going to make you better? You're going to score more goals if you're on Twitter for an hour today. And if they say yeah, and somehow they can think of a reasonable reason why getting an hour of Twitter and Instagram is going to make me score a goal on Saturday, then I'm all in. But I doubt they'll be able to come up with that.
I think they would be rarities. Okay, let's take some questions. If we could, there was a question down at the front. We'll start with you, please. If before you ask the question, you could tell us who you are and who you're representing or where you've come from today, that would be great.
My name is Jeppe. I'm coach for Germany. My question is, if you have to hire a coach, few coaches have everything. What are the absolute critical stuff that you want in a coach? Let's say a coach who is on pitch with the players, not maybe managing primarily.
Yeah, so what are the key things? So I'm looking for a couple of key things I mentioned. I want a coach that's open-minded and curious and is a learner. I'd like them to be hardworking. It's very fundamental. We can't get away from it as coaches that we have to work hard. It's a non-negotiable, but you can be humble with that. So for me, when I'm interviewing coaches, apart from the other stuff that you want to see them pitch or court to actually see how their relationship is with the athlete, I want them to come across as being humble, hardworking, curious, and open-minded and want to learn.
Good question. Good question. Any other questions about? Yeah, go for it. The floor is yours.
Thank you. My name is still Jeppe. In our sport, we have this individual element, and when we're back in training, we are very much a team because someone has to play back and forth to each other. To install culture in a group like this, where we have culture in a pairing if you're doubles, and you have culture in a group, what are your thoughts on this subject? I know it's very broad, but...
No, it's really good, and I'm not sure if... I'll try and answer the question with an example. I did some work a couple of years ago with a national swimming group, and we had exactly the same thing, where one of the swimmers was like, I'm not racing in the pool with the rest of the team. I'm on my own trying to win a medal. So why should I have to agree to all these team values? And how they understood that was that if you're late for a session because you're on your own time, then you're affecting the people that you're going to be training with and potentially lessening their ability to make you train harder. And so actually, there's ripple effects in your behaviors to the rest of the team that is going to come back on you. And once again, going back to that connection bit, they have to understand what's in it for me. Well, that's the piece that you go for. If you have an individual that doesn't want to be part of the team, then it's like, well, what are you not going to get by by not agreeing to the team values, and there'll always be something that you'll find. It might be around that. Ultimately, it'll be around suboptimal performance by doing that. So that's one way to look at it.
Can I follow up?
Yeah.
Do you see any particular differences if you want to establish?
It's like the Academy Awards. If you speak for too long, they just they just put the music over and cut you. Try again.
So when you create a culture in your football club, we are literally one team and we all go on the pitch together when I score a goal. Do you see any differences in like the values that you would choose for the team that we are as a collection of individuals trying to win versus the team Brentford trying to win?
Well, I think the obvious one for the team is that it is the we before the me. So often, like, very hard to keep everyone happy. If somebody's not getting game time or minutes who's getting dropped, for them to have the same positive outlook on the rest of the team, you have to have a very strong culture that they realise that it's for the greater good. Whereas when you're working with individuals, there's less about that, and there's more around individual development. So I haven't really answered your question, because we work off both things. We have like a kind of hub and spoke plan with our players. So player in the middle, whoever they are, spokes with all the various practitioners we have and nutrition, blah, blah, blah. And then we have clear metrics and objectives for that player to get better. So it might be a simple objective around something that's easy to measure, like S&C and power outputs or nutrition and skin folds. But it might also be about how they play the game, and coaches find that hard to objectively put a metric on that, like how much influence you're having in the middle third of the pitch, for example. How do you measure that? But once you start to unravel that, you can start to find some good objectives for that as an individual, but they're still working within the collective. I definitely haven't answered your question.
I think you gave it a good shot. Yeah. Last question, is there one up there, or are you just holding up a glass of water? I'm sorry, I can't quite see at the back. Is that a question at the back from the young lady? No?
There's one over there.
One over here? Yes?
Hi, really good talk, Ben. Enjoyed that. And there was lots of discussion about the challenges you face in terms of kind of finance and performance demands. So what sort of things did you do to kind of manage your own stresses and well-being?
Yeah, good question. I have a kind of like a little matrix of people I talk to, a kind of mentor. So I have at the top a couple of like Yoda types, master coaches that I've known over my time, that I'll always bounce ideas off or just tell them how I'm feeling. I had my original sports psychologist lecturer at Loughborough in my first year back in 1992. I'm still very close to. He's one of those Yodas. And then I'll have other people that are on the same level as me, but in other sports or maybe even other clubs, that I'll be able to. We often have the same common issues that you bounce ideas off, or just blow off, or have a chance to talk to, and they'll understand where you're coming from. And then I also mentor younger coaches to remind myself of some of the core principles that I wanted to have, and sometimes you lose as you move up the pyramid. So even in Fiji, when things were going wrong and found out that the dictator was not going to pay me and was bugging my phone, that was annoying. I could ring that group, that network, and it gave me quite a lot of comfort that some things you can still control in this narrative. So I use that all the time, still use that today.
And you still meet your old PE coach from when you were 9 years old when you're out for a walk with your dog.
Yeah,
and it's a lovely thing to be able to do. I
suppose that's kind of one of the other things that, like, when I had a very kind of high boost when I was in my early 30s and quickly got into like international setups as coach. Suddenly thought I literally knew everything. And I'm thinking, this guy that's in his 60s, what the hell does he know? Why is he still even involved? Shouldn't he be on a golf course somewhere? And as I've got older, I'm sure we all feel. I feel like I know nothing now, and you feel, and that experience is so important. Yeah. And not to just cast off those coaches that have been, and it doesn't matter if it's international level or it's working with kids, they would have had that body of coaching that they'll have some absolute gold in them that you just want to help, so to always try to have those available to you in some way.
I think that's a lovely note on which to finish. Ben, thank you so much for your time. We've overrun slightly. I've been getting wild gestures from in the darkened corners of this hall to wrap up. I would like to invite David Cabello, Chair of BWF Development and Sport for All Committee, to present you with a small token of our appreciation.
Thank you very
Ben,
much.
thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. It's been lovely. Thank you for
If you just have a... Ladies and gentlemen, Ben Ryan.